Hi, Scott Hogle here for Teach America to Sell Tour. I want to talk to you today about a very specific subject, a subject which I've titled How to Sell Through the Storm. Why is that so important right now? Because there is a storm raging all around us right now. What started off as a medical crisis for some of us has quickly turned into a financial crisis for all of us. So how do we sell our way through it? And by the way, if you don't think you're in sales, I would like to ask you this. Can any company in America stay in business if somebody doesn't sell something to somebody? Stores around America are closed right now. Businesses are not generating revenue. So whether you're a full-time professional vocational seller, where you pick up the phone and you have retail or commercial or business-to-business customers, or you're a leader who's trying to sell your team on to stay on the idea of staying bought into you and doing what your company needs you to do, we are all in the sales business. We are all in the persuasion business. So how do we lead and sell our ways out of this? And I want to talk to you about a few very specific things that you can do. A few years ago, I wrote a best-selling book called Persuade, The 7 Empowering Laws of the Salesmaker. And one of the most important principles I talked about in Persuade is what I call a relationship selling principle. In traditional sales, the transaction is often the reason for the relationship, but in relationship selling, the relationship becomes the reason for the transaction. Why is that important right now? Because in this time of crisis, when you're hurting, when you need help, where do you go? Well, you go to a friend. Hopefully at this point in your career, you've built a number of relationships that you can go to not just sell things to, but to serve as well. But I would also ask you this, what about those new relationships that you need to start in this time of crisis? How do you connect with them? And I'll give you some very specific strategies for that as well. Here's what I believe. I believe we're all going to come out of this. Now, whether or not we come out of it stronger than we went into it or weaker, that's really up to each of us individually. Let me explain. We're all going to come out of it, but I believe how we walk through it determines how we walk out of it. Kelly Clarkson sings a very popular song. Many of you have heard it before. It's called What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Stronger. Well, that's a very common saying in America, but as common as it is, it doesn't necessarily make it true. We all know people who go through crisis in life, but they don't come through stronger. They actually come out of it worse, or they come out of it weaker. They don't come out better, they come out bitter. So how we walk through this will determine whether or not we come out stronger. It's in the storms of life that we develop the muscles, the experience, and the stamina, not just to sail through the storm, but to sail through the storm and then prepare for the future ahead. Solomon said there's a time and season to all things, and this too shall pass as well. But until it does pass, how do we sell through it? How do we lead through it? That's what we're going to talk about today. The first thing I want to talk to you about is, number one, you've got to get yourself together. Let me explain what I mean by that. This COVID crisis threw everybody for a loop. In fact, some of us, it just knocked us out. If you're familiar with how a boxing round works, if one boxer knocks out the other one, they get a 10 count. And if that person doesn't get up, it's considered a KO or a knockout. Some of you have been knocked down a little bit too long. It's time to get up off the mat. If you're still down, you've got to get up. You've got to get your life going again. Just because you're sheltering at home or you're selling at home doesn't mean you necessarily have to stay down the whole time. Now, I know it's tough. We're all dealing with a lot of different things, but there comes a time where you have to get off the mat. In those first few days, maybe even that first week, we were all blindsided. Maybe you were down on the mat, but if you're still down on the mat, the first thing I would say to you is it's time to get up and get moving again. So you've got to get yourself together. The second thing you've got to do is get your message together. Once you get the messenger together in step one, step two is to get your message together. Why is that so important? Because people have to buy into what you're saying before they'll ever buy what you're selling. So what's your story right now? Are you confident? Until you are confident, don't go into the next Zoom meeting. Don't go into that next family conversational meeting. Don't go into walk into that office meeting, because confidence transfers. Whatever inside of you comes out in the time of crisis. Some people believe crisis builds character. I would submit to you that crisis actually reveals character. So whatever's going on inside of you, make sure you get that together, get that message together, because that's what's going to come out. And then number three, I want to share with you a very important principle, whether you're selling or leading during this time, and it's simply this. The greatest sales makers in the world, They don't create desire, they discover it and then they direct it. What I mean by that is that you've got to be able to tap into the emotion in the room. I'm sure you'll agree that there's sometimes positive energy and sometimes negative energy. It doesn't matter whether it's positive or negative, you've got to be able to tap into what a person's why is, tap in and reach them where they're at, and then direct that energy to a positive outcome. There's three things that people want to buy right now. I know what you're thinking. I've got a lot of customers and nobody's buying anything right now. You know, that's true in some cases. Business is shut down, industry is shut down. It's a very difficult, tumultuous environment to sell in right now. But there are a few things that people are buying, and I'm going to share those with you right now. The first thing people are buying today is what I would call hope. One of the things great salespeople and great leaders have the ability to do is paint a picture of the future, a picture of hope that transcends the pain of the present. Hope is so important because when you can paint pictures of hope and show people a future that doesn't exist without you, they'll follow you anywhere. My publisher asked me a few months ago if I would record the new Zig Ziglar Goals program. While Zig Ziglar, the father of motivational speaking, is no longer with us today, his audio program for the Goals program, which has sold millions and is well known worldwide, has just come out again in an audiobook, and he asked if I would read it. As I was reading it, I was also rediscovering for the first time many of the motivational principles that I had learned from Zig years ago. Zig has this very famous saying, maybe you've heard before, and it goes like this: where there's hope in the future, there's power in the present. I'll tell you, when I read that, I stopped dead in my tracks. I hit pause on the recording and I underlined it because I knew I wanted to come back to it. And gosh, this was like 2 months before the COVID crisis broke out in America. Let me give you that line again that Zig said. Where there's hope in the future, there's power in the present. So always remember that. The one thing people are buying today is hope. As long as you have a great story to tell that paints a picture of hope for the future, people will follow you anywhere, whether you're leading an organization or you're trying to get a customer to lead you through a presentation. The second thing people are buying today is they're buying help. People are looking for help. People are struggling in a way they've never struggled before. When you're in a foxhole, what do you want in that foxhole? You want a friend, right? I'm reminded the story of the man who's walking down the street and he falls into a hole. The walls are so steep he can't get out. Well, hours go by and then all of a sudden he hears a doctor going by and he goes, "Hey doc, hey, I fell down in this hole. The walls are so steep I can't get out. Can you help me out?" Doctor says, "Sure, no problem." He writes him a prescription. He throws it down in the hole. Well, that didn't help very much, did it? Well, another hour goes by and then a priest walks by. "Hey, Father, it's me. I'm down here in the hole. I've fallen down here and the walls are so steep I can't get up. Can you help me out?" Father says, "No problem." So he writes a prayer down on a piece of paper, throws it down in the hole. Then a friend comes by. "Hey, Joe, it's me. I'm down here. The walls are so steep. I've fallen in this hole. I can't get out. Can you help me out?" So Joe jumps into the hole with him. And the guy goes, "What did you do that for? Are you stupid or something? Now we're both stuck down here." But then Joe looks at his friends and he says, "Yeah, but I've been down here before and I know the way out." When you're stuck in a foxhole, who do you want with you? You want a friend. So that's the second thing people are buying today. They're buying help. They're buying a helping hand. The third thing people want to buy today is they want to buy a hand. Everybody needs a hand. Talk is cheap, but when you're willing to roll up your sleeves and actually help somebody, to serve somebody, that makes a big difference. One of the most important principles I talk about in Persuade is that we need to always add value before we ask for value, because it creates an invisible return. It comes from Luke 6:38, which says, "To give and it shall be given." It's one of the great paradoxical commandments of the universe that what you give away comes back to you, but then it comes back multiplied. So in giving a hand, we want to add value before we ask for value, because it creates an invisible return. And frankly, until you've added value to somebody, until you've found a way to serve them, you haven't really earned the right to ask for value in return. Until you've made a deposit into the relationship bank account, you haven't earned a right to make a withdrawal yet. One of the things my team did in those first few days of the COVID crisis here in America at iHeartMedia is we created a campaign called Serve to Sell. And in essence, what we did was We got our sales team on the line to call businesses all around the marketplace and discover who is actually offering discounts, who was selling gift cards. While businesses were closing down, who was going to stay open, who was going to have drive-through services or drop-off services or pickup services. And we literally used our entire sales team to move through the market. We marshaled our time and our resources, and within less than 48 hours, we were able to grab hundreds of businesses and contacts that would stay open during COVID, put it onto a website, and then begin to promote it over the radio. One of the principles that has served us very well here at iHeartMedia is to serve to sell all the time. Always add value before you ask for value, because it always creates an invisible return. So let me ask you this question. How can you serve the people in your world right now? Maybe it's a student sheltering at home. Maybe it's a customer you haven't called in a while. Maybe it's an employee you need to give an encouraging word to. What are the right questions you should be asking yourselves right now? One of the things I've discovered too is that if I'm feeling down in the dumps or I'm feeling fear, one of the best ways to overcome that is to literally stop thinking about myself and get my focus on other people. Instead of figuring out how to sell something, start asking yourself, how can I serve someone? And then the dollars follow after that, because you've added value first. You know, it's hard to look for a silver lining in a cloud when there's nothing but clouds everywhere and that's all you see. It's hard to sell when you're in the middle of a storm, and it's even harder to see when you're in the middle of a storm. But believe it or not, when you're in the middle of a crisis, when you're literally trying to sail and get through a storm, there's always benefits that come out in the middle, not just on the other side. For example, right now, I'm spending more time with family than I've ever had to spend before. I've got a 20-year-old and a 16-year-old, both schooling, one schooling at home for college, the other schooling at home in high school, and I get to see them every day for hours. And I have to tell you, it's absolutely wonderful. It's a little stressful too. I get to see my wife more than I ever have before. Now, sometimes we're fighting over the home office space, but there's benefits that are coming out of the crisis as well. There's new connections, there's more intimacy. It's also bringing us together a little bit more with coworkers through Zoom, also with clients on the phone. I'm calling people who I've never called before. But again, why am I telling you this? Because in the middle of trying to figure out how to survive, once you kind of get that past you, you're able to see other things as well. One of my friends, Kevin Hall, is an author who wrote Aspire, How to Discover Your Purpose Through the Power of Words. Kevin tells a great story in his book about the word opportunity. Here's what he says about opportunity. The first few letters of the word OP are the opening for optics. In other words, that has to do with what you actually see, right? I would ask you right now, what opportunity? What do you see that nobody else sees? How is the world changing around you? Where might the opportunity be? The second part to the word after OP is the word port, P-O-R-T. Port has to do with opening. So ships in the ancient world, they would have to see the port or the opening in order to sail into the port to deliver their cargo. Now, that may seem very easy today with all the great navigation systems we have around us, but imagine times in ancient history where we didn't have the navigation equipment, where they literally had to sail, paddle, or somehow figure out how to get through the storm no matter what was happening around them. We're in a little bit of that situation right now. We're flooded with technology, but we don't have all the tools at our disposal that we once did before. So again, let me ask you this question. What do you see that nobody else sees right now? What opportunities do you see? The world is literally shifting under our feet. In the middle of every storm, there's a great opportunity. I don't need to remind you that in the last decade, there's the term creative destruction that you're probably familiar with. Creative destruction was opportunity for one. While it cost in some areas of business, it created opportunity in other areas. For example, the biggest hotel in the world doesn't have any hotel rooms. That's a Airbnb. The biggest taxi cab company in the world doesn't own any cars. That's Uber. And the list kind of goes on. There's a lot of industries that are not just shifting, but they're being shaken right now. What opportunities do you see around the corner in your future? Because opportunities, remember, are time bound. What do you see? What are the openings that you see? In the 7th chapter of Persuade, I call it the law of the prospector. The law of the prospector simply says this: the sales maker develops the potential within them, and as they develop the potential within them, they discover the opportunities around them. Let me see if I can illustrate it with a story. I put in the 7th chapter of Persuade, one of my all-time favorite motivational stories, and it's not just mine. This story isn't just the most motivational story to me. It's been motivating us in America for over 150 years. A gentleman by the name of Russell Cornwell developed the story, and you'll find it in the Law of the Prospector. It's called Acre of Diamonds, and here's how the story goes. There was once a farmer on an African continent who had spent his whole life slaving away trying to make a living. And one day he heard that a lot of farmers just like him were selling their farms in pursuit of acres of diamonds. So he got inspired one day and he thought, you know what? I'm tired of being a farmer. I would like to go and discover my own acre of diamonds. So what did he do? He sold the farm. He took that money, he bought mining tools, and he set out across the African continent to find his acres of diamonds. Well, the man never quite found his acre of diamonds. He actually died one day. Meanwhile, though, back on the farm, the man who had bought his farm was walking along the creek bed one day, and he spied a glistening stone coming at him from the bottom of the creek. He didn't really know what it was, but he liked the way it looked, so he reaches down and he grabs it out of the creek, and when he walks into West's house, he puts it on top of a mantle. Well, about a month later, a friend is visiting from America. And the friend says, oh my gosh, that thing that's on your mantle, where did you get that? And the farmer says, well, it's in my creek. I was walking along one day. I liked the way it looked, so I just pulled it out. My creek bed is loaded with it. That diamond happened to be one of the largest sized diamonds ever discovered up to that point on the continent of Africa. So what's the moral of the story? It's simply this. If only the first farmer had taken the time to discover and to learn, frankly, what uncut diamonds look like in their rough state. In other words, if he had taken the time to look a little bit closer at the opportunity that was around him, he would have discovered that everything that he sought was within reach. The opportunity that you seek isn't just within reach, it's usually right under your feet. So I ask this question again. What do you see that nobody else sees? What opening, what port do you spy? I promise you, there's an opportunity, there is a solution to your problem, and you are a solution to a customer's problem, which I'm going to talk about next as well. Here's one last thing I want to remind you. Opportunity always comes disguised as a problem. Opportunity doesn't come wrapped in $100 bills, or else everybody would be picking them up. You've got to be able to see through the problem to discover a solution, because a sale is never made until first there's a solution to somebody's problem. And I promise you, you are a solution to somebody's problem today. Have you discovered it yet? If you haven't, start asking yourself the right questions and discover the greatness within you so you can share the riches within you with other people. Some of those questions may sound something like this. What are the gifts and talents that I could share today with somebody? Maybe it's something you do, but maybe it's something that you are. For example, maybe it's just a customer you need to call to share a kind word, or a word of encouragement, a word of hope about the future. Maybe you have something of value that you can offer free during this time of crisis. Whatever it may be, I would encourage you, start digging a little bit deep. Ask yourself these interrogative questions. A question is like a shovel that can go deep within and dig the greatness up within you and within other people. Figure out what the right questions to be asking yourself is, because you've got those acres of diamonds within you, and then you can start giving them away to other people. Because once you connect with yourself in that way, you'll also be able to connect with your customers and your employees too that way.